Going to be having this conversation throughout the morning, throughout the day. Meanwhile, despite investor concerns about complacency, fear gauges are still mostly above pre-pandemic levels. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta joins us now with more.
Well, Lisa, volatility inching lower and lower in both the stock and bond market. You just look at the MOVE and VIX indexes. You are starting to see this really interesting dynamic come as those taper tantrum fears creep up. So let's visualize that. What did that look like back in 2013, May of that year? Chairman Bernanke starts talking about tapering. You can kind of see on the chart where that happened, rattling the market, a 150 basis point surge approximately in Treasury yields that followed through the end of the year. That's really what the market is scared of right now, especially when it comes to what that means for the stock market. A stock market, Lisa, that's been dealing with a lot of excess money in the system. And that's as we start to see that supply decrease, volatility starting to drop as well. But Lisa, that dynamic may not stick around if we start to see any hint of a policy change in today's meeting.
Kriti Gupta, thank you so much for that. Talking about the calmness in markets, I'd love to get your sense, Bob, of record low junk bond yields, the sense that there continues to be this flood of cash into credit. How much longer can that continue?
Well, it's going to continue for a while because we're effectively in nirvana for corporate credit. Companies had a chance over the last year to load up their balance sheet with almost costless debt. So they did. And what they did is, in effect, put in place semi-permanent, low-cost capital. And now, for the next 12 to 24 months, they're going to see revenue and earnings just cascade at an unimaginable rate. So EBITDA is going to accelerate, and they're going to see a tremendous amount of deleveraging. Look, we all want to buy things a lot cheaper. We all want to buy investment-grade corporates at 4%. We can't. They're 2.5%. I want to buy high yield at 6 to 8%. I can't. It's less than 4%, but it's going to get tighter because the credit fundamentals are there, the dynamics are there, and the cash is just piling up everywhere.
All right, nirvana for corporate debt. Bob Michael, George Goncalves, you're both sticking with us. Right now, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle joining us with a look at the stocks moving ahead of the opening bell. Abigail.
Certainly below that benign surface with futures basically flat, very mixed moves. Beneath the surface, though, Oracle is one stock that is dropping down about 5%. This after they put up a big beat on the bottom line, a modest top line beat, but not enough, some analysts are saying, to justify the more than 50% rally over the last year. In particular, the cloud sales fell short, so that stock, again, Oracle shares are down 5%. We have more weakness in the metal space. Some of the metals and mining companies are down. China, of course, is campaigning to rein in commodity prices and reduce speculation. It seems that investors, traders around these metals and mining stocks are taking it seriously, because today we actually have the metals themselves higher, but these stocks lower. And then finally, for a bright spot, we have the cruise operators popping on the day. This as Wolf has upgraded the entire space, saying that there's improving momentum. Booking is down only 15 to 25% versus 2019, versus May down 40 to 50%, so an improvement, and pricing is holding firm. So the reopening trade is in play, Lisa.
Abigail, thank you so much. Coming up, geopolitical tensions coming into focus. Officials tempering expectations with President Biden meeting Vladimir Putin in Geneva. That conversation up next. This is Bloomberg.
Every Friday with 30 minutes dedicated to fixed income, I'm Jonathan Ferro. This is Bloomberg Real Yield.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
This is the worst U.S.-Russia relationship that we've had since really before the end of the Cold War, since the time of Mikhail Gorbachev. Certainly, since Putin's been in power for 20 years, he's consolidated really a very authoritarian rule, and Russia has returned to the world stage very effectively. We're dealing with a power that's really on the move, and I think President Biden is correct to want to try and find a way to lower the tensions.
President Biden seeking to dial down tensions with Vladimir Putin in Geneva. Putin's spokesman saying the Russian president is, quote, always clear about laying out the red lines for Russia, and especially will be in the discussion today, which won't be easy. For more, let's go to Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo joining us from Geneva. A chaotic press scrum. What's the latest?
Well, it was, Lisa. You know, at one point there was a lot of rough action going on between the Russian security and the U.S. TV reporters. It was also interesting that a number of questions were put to President Biden. He did appear to nod at one point, but now, of course, his team is saying don't overinterpret anything that happened there. He couldn't really hear what was happening given the mess that this press scrum turned out to be right at the end of that handshake that you showed before. So nonetheless, however, we know that this meeting is still ongoing. Not a lot has leaked from here. And in fact, we're not really expecting anything to leak from this meeting until it's officially done. It'll be interesting to see who speaks first, whether this is a press conference by President Biden or Putin decides to really catch the attention and go for it first. Now, so far, as I said, not a lot has come out of this meeting. The only thing we've heard, of course, is the Russian leader saying we hope this is a productive meeting, and President Biden saying we have a lot to talk about and it's better to do it face to face.
Maria Tadeo, thank you so much. Well, thank you for all the updates throughout the morning and afternoon. JP Morgan's Bob Michael and George Goncalves of MUFG still with us. George, does anyone care about these discussions between Vladimir Putin and President Biden with respect to market movements?
I think geopolitical has taken a step back. I mean, obviously it's still part of the macro construct and people still watch it. I just don't think it's, we're going to really get anything out of it. You can look at the G20. I mean, just all these events lately. I mean, markets have been awash with both fiscal stimulus and local central bank easing, that people just focus on liquidity more so than anything else, quite frankly.
So is that your sense too, Bob, the idea that, frankly, the Fed is front and center and pretty much overwhelms any other geopolitical issues?
Well, I think all the central banks are front and center, and they're all acting together to provide the liquidity backdrop. But yeah, these conversations matter, whether it's with Russia or it's with China. People want to see a year from now a reopened economy operating smoothly and without any frictions. And that includes a lot on the cybersecurity front.
All right, so when it comes to potential risks, and we talked about how it seems like everything is a nirvana when it comes to risk, certainly with credit you were talking about, the potential existential threats to markets, are things sort of precariously priced to perfection, and not necessarily prepared to be resilient to some sort of exogenous shock?
Well, yeah, they are, but that's the world we live in. So what is going to happen? The Delta variant starts to spread, then the reaction function, we know, more fiscal stimulus, fiscal transfers, and more monetary ease. If something happens on any policy front, more monetary support. So I think right now we just have to work through the next couple of years, accept the level of credit spreads that we're getting, recognize that corporate America, corporate Europe, corporate world is in a perfect position, and just enjoy the ride.
All right, so George, do you agree with Bob that we are sort of in this nirvana for corporate credit and frankly for risk more broadly?
Well, so here's the thing. So we're trying to transition from this really buoyant world of super accommodated financial conditions and get back to the economy standing on its own 2 feet, ultimately, right? So we're trying to move away from government-based and central bank-based support, and then each economy on their own started to kind of operate to their own devices. And that takes time. And especially, we don't know coming out of the pandemic and how all this is going to transpire. And a lot of activity was pulled forward. We look at how much consumption we saw in the U.S. on the durable goods side, and we're going to need to have that jump back into the service sector, and it's never going to be smooth. And so I think that we're in this interesting kind of crossroads, but by and large, investors have money to put to work, and therefore, you're going to pick your spots where you feel comfortable with. And I think credit still is that place where you can kind of ride things out. I am concerned about valuations more broadly, and I do think that some sort of hiccup could create a backup in spreads and lower equity markets. But like we've seen all along, it's probably still a buy the dip mentality for at least 2 or 3 times before proven wrong.
All right, Bob, so if that's the environment, is cash a liability?
Lisa, I meet with individual and institutional investors, different ones every week, and every one of them has the same problem. They have too much cash, and they're trying to find a place to invest it. Not one in the last 6 months has come to me and said, oh my God, I have too much risk. Help me raise some cash.
All right, so that basically speaks to, yes, cash is a liability, George.
Lisa, until the Fed takes the punch bowl away and the central banks do it in aggregate, you're supposed to invest in these markets and benefit from them.
George, 20 seconds. Cash, liability?
Cash is definitely a liability, but it kind of counterbalance that's at least you have the opportunity to put money to work if things do get cheap. So you got to have some around.
All right, well, a lot of people have a lot of it lying around, evidently. Bob Michael and George Goncalves, thank you so much for taking the time. Coming up, the analyst action you need to know, and later, Wall Street bracing for the pandemic-driven boom to run out of steam. We're discussing the outlook for U.S. banks with RBC's Lori Calvasina and Morgan Stanley's Dan Skelly. This is Bloomberg.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
This is Countdown to the Open. I'm Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. As Tom Keene was saying this morning, stocks, they're trading. Can't say much more about them. Pretty much range bound. Time now for our morning calls. A look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. First up, Cowen cutting his Nike price target down to $145. The analyst saying that the firm's proprietary data on China points to a further deceleration in gross merchandise volume. Next up, Pivotal Research upgrading Dish Networks to a buy with a $60 price target. The analyst seeing significant upside potential from the company's 5G wireless service. And finally, Wolf Research upgrading the cruise line airlines to outperform. The analyst highlighting improving trends in pricing power and reservations. Everybody wants to go on vacation these days, as you can see from airline capacity. Coming up, Citigroup becoming the latest bank to warn investors of a trading slowdown. That conversation coming up next with RBC Capital's Lori Calvasina and Morgan Stanley's Dan Kelly. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
Right now, about half of U.S. households invest. We'd like to get that number up to 95+%. Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online. It should just be something that people do.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Melting into the green ahead of the open as we just count down seconds away. This is Countdown to the Open. I'm Lisa Abramowitz in for Jonathan Farrow. As we await for that bell to clang, we can see NASDAQ futures leading the charge up 0.2%. S&P climbing into the green after being red for most of the morning. If you flip up the boards, a bit into bonds ahead of that expectation for the Federal Reserve, possibly to just stay on hold, not mention anything about tapering or adjust, frankly, their dot up for projection for when they're going to raise rates. Crude actually diving after earlier being up at the highest level since 2018, just off that now. Let's head to the markets desk. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle joining us now with the stocks to watch at the opening bell. Abigail.
Lisa, let's start out with some of the automakers because we have some of the more traditional automakers popping while the electric vehicle makers are down. This, of course, is GM is saying that they are going to boost their EV spending by 30% to $35 billion by 2025. That stock really getting a boost up 3%, taking breaking forward with it just slightly, but Tesla and Workhorse, the electric vehicle companies, on the prospect of this competition down just a bit. Now, if we turn to the meme stocks, also a mixed picture. The older, more traditional meme stocks, AMC and GameStop, are down this morning. Excuse me, Beyond Meat. And Beyond Meat actually just flipping higher. So investors really can't make up their minds on some of these stocks that are trading less on fundamentals and more on short interest. And Arrival, it is a new arrival to the meme arena. It is up about 9% today. There's a 7% short interest on it. Another electric vehicle company down on the year. So it seems the Reddit traders are targeting that one. And then finally, taking a bigger picture, Lisa, Mung Tech, we do have Apple up 0.5% after slipping yesterday. Oracle, however, on that disappointing quarter relative to the big rally over the last year and disappointment in the cloud space, down 4.3%. The metal space still under pressure. This, of course, metals today stabilizing, but in recent times down a bit. And China does have a campaign to rein in prices. So some of those metals and mining companies, they are down.
Thank you so much, Abigail. Rediteers, hadn't heard that one yet. A year of pandemic-induced market volatility helping banks deliver record profits. Citigroup becoming the latest to warn investors that trading revenue may slow.
Investment banking revenues are likely to be down in the low to mid single-digit range. When I look at revenues for the quarter for North America consumer, likely to be down at a similar level to what they were in the first quarter in terms of the year-over-year performance.
This comes after JP Morgan's chief Jamie Dimon signaled a potential 38% drop in trading revenue, saying, quote, "Remember the quarter last year was exceptional. This quarter is like, call it more normal." For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. Kriti.
Well, Lisa, banks, they should be doing well. You've got lending coming back, spending coming back, even higher yields. That should be a recipe for success, but that's really the opposite story that we're seeing. The sector not having a great June so far. Citigroup and JP Morgan in particular nearing correction territory. Looks like at the open, Citigroup now down over 10% in the last 2 weeks. And what's interesting is that their trading revenue doesn't seem to have a ton of bearing on how their stocks have been doing, at least this year. We're posting the same profits in the first quarter of 2021 as they did in the second quarter of last year when volatility was extremely high. We all remember that. The stock's now trading more on cyclical momentum than anything else. But let's compare that to how it's doing to the broader S&P 500. It was starting to catch up, but Lisa, it looks like that gap is starting to widen.
Kriti, thank you so much. Joining us now, RBC's Lori Calvasina and Morgan Stanley's Dan Skelly. Lori, I want to get your view on the banks. We've seen them actually come off pretty steadily over the past 9 trading sessions. Do you think this weakness in financials will continue as people start to price out the big pops in trading revenues that we saw last year?
Look, I think it could continue a bit in the short term. One of the things that we've noticed on our work is, first off, if you look at the rate of upward revisions for financials, and it's largely banks, frankly, in our data, it had been one of the strongest sectors for most of the year, really outpacing all the other major sectors. And recently, we've seen it slip pretty hard. So I do think that this concern on trading revenues is starting to get baked into the pace of upward revisions, the earnings sentiment, so to speak. And that's been partially, responsible for some of this weakness we've seen. But also remember, Lisa, the big question of the past week and a half has been what the heck is going on with the 10-year yield. And we saw some slippage there, some pretty meaningful slippage. And financials and banks in particular also do tend to trade very, very closely in tandem with yields, in tandem with ISM, which looks like it might be starting to show some weakness. So I think there have been a few things that have been pummeling the banks, both the trading revenue issue, the earnings, and also, frankly, just the cyclical momentum starting to fade a bit in here. All that being said, it's the cheapest sector in the S&P. I would ride out some further underperformance and stick with it for the long term.
All right, so baked in, Dan, do you agree? And sort of something to just hold for the time being?
Yeah, we're definitely still holding here, Lisa, and good morning. Thanks for having me on this morning. Look, I think it's the divergence between short-term and long-term factors. I think, as Lori alluded to, with the yield curve having come in the last couple of weeks, that has certainly been a headwind. But when I think about the long term, there's still significant drivers over the next 6, 12, and 24 months. Our research team just hosted a bunch of companies and management teams at Morgan Stanley's financial conference the last several days. And there's some themes that are unequivocally positive that have years to run. The strength of the consumer, the strength in housing, which, as you know, is going to probably be a multi-year trend here driven by demographics and millennial buying. When I look at the next several quarters, we think there's room for banks and financials to catch up as reserve releases continue to be favorable, and return of capital post the late June stress test becomes an additional catalyst. So yes, they've been weak on the yield curve, but we do see additional catalysts here positively over the next 6 months and beyond.
Lori, I want to pick up on something you were talking about. People are trying to figure out what the heck is going on with bond yields, the 10-year going down, yields going lower, price going up. We were just speaking with George Concalves and Bob Michael of JP Morgan talking about how this is nirvana for credit. Is it also nirvana for equities for the foreseeable future? You should just buy no matter what. It doesn't matter where you buy. Yes, valuations are expensive, but probably they will get more so.
Look, I think it depends on your time horizon. I tend to be more long-term focused, so we're trying to ride out what we think might be a sort of a short-term, slightly cyclical storm. But I do think that we are having a little bit of a moment in the market, right, where we're going through all these potential peaks on different macro indicators. As you've got a tension in the market right now between very strong levels for the foreseeable future, frankly, above average levels if you look at things like GDP for quite some time. But slowing rates of change are often difficult for markets to digest, especially growth investors, especially hedge fund investors. And we do think that we're probably peaking in terms of the rate of change of earnings growth right now. Now, typically, stocks are down 6 months after that happens, but they're up 12 months later. So I think you have to decide right now, are you a 6-month investor or a 12-month investor? If you're a 6-month investor, you may want to pivot to some of the defensives. But if you're a longer-term investor, I do think you try to ride it out.
Dan, do you agree?
I think that's largely correct. And I would just add to that beyond financials, we're just trying to be more selective across the board today as the index level is likely capped for the reasons Lori articulated in terms of peak rate of change and so forth. But when we look beyond the index and under the surface, one of the themes we continue to advocate, Lisa, is looking for high quality names that can go on offense here, utilizing their balance sheet. What I mean by that is looking at the well-positioned data era leaders. Our firm has done a lot of work on this. And as we've talked about ad nauseum the last 12 months, COVID was a massive digital wake-up call. And so what we're paying very close attention to at a stock level is looking at those business models that can leverage strong balance sheets, invest in R&D, and get paid for taking share in what's going to be a very vast technological change the next several years. And frankly, that trend spans several industries. We're seeing it in financials, but we're also seeing it in industrials. We're seeing it in healthcare. So that tech-enabled leadership is another theme we're paying attention to at an idiosyncratic level.
Dan, this is a huge issue and one that an increasing number of guests say. Active management is here and it's the way to outperform. But how much do you get paid to be active? Not necessarily in terms of fees, but in terms of outperformance. I mean, if we're looking at average returns of 6 to 8% in the S&P, I'm making this up, please tell me what your expectation is. How much higher could it be or do you expect it to be with active management, Dan?
Yes, so that's an excellent point, Lisa. And what I would just say, zooming out a bit, our wealth management research department updates its capital market assumptions each spring. And we actually see U.S. returns being a little bit lower than that in the long run, call it the next 5 to 7 years. We're looking at something like 4 to 5% total returns on U.S. equities. So in that low return environment, which is, as you know, is a far cry from the abnormally high returns of the last 5 years, 10 years, we think active makes even more sense. We've also built models, quantitative processes that help give us market signals as to when active could be more likely to outperform than passive. And so we're trying to optimize for fees as well, exactly to your point. And when I look at some of those signals today, Lisa, in terms of correlations, in terms of dispersion between different stocks, when I look at market valuations and the yield curve, a lot of those signals that we look at purely objectively are still signaling very strong performance for active going forward.
All right, well, let's head over to Europe. EU equities still trading at a steep discount relative to the United States. The latest Bank of America Fund Manager survey revealing clients are the most overweight to the region since 2018. Ritika Gupta joining us with more. Ritika.
Yeah, Lisa, there is that value and cyclical tilt that is really helping European equities. It's contributed to the Stoxx 600 on its 9-day winning streak, its longest going back to all the way to 1999. And if you look at a year-to-date picture, the Stoxx 600 up some 15%, outpacing the gains of both the S&P 500, the MSCI Emerging Markets Index, index as well. But there are some signs that there's some overheating going on here, perhaps. If you look at the relative strength index, that's a momentum indicator. That's above that 70 threshold, indicating it's in overbought territory. Yet still, the majority of those surveyed in the Bank of America survey saying they expect this bull market to continue. If you look at the Vanguard Europe Fund, it saw soars of inflows in both April and May. And if you consider that we're only halfway through June, we could see that those gains or inflows could be even bigger. But there are some risks on the horizon, some pointing to a softening of global growth expectations. And of course, Lisa, we're going to be watching out for the Fed. Any signs on what it says, perhaps on early tapering, and any message on inflation, Lisa?
Thank you so much, Ritika. Lori, do you think that there still is opportunity in Europe over the U.S. in terms of equities, or do you think that that's been played out?
So look, I think some of the data is a little bit conflicting, but generally I would say yes, that there is more opportunity in Europe if you're quite longer term. If you look at the valuation, which you mentioned, the U.S. has actually improved relative to non-U.S. equities and Europe in particular, but there's still an overvaluation problem in the U.S. And I hear what the fund manager survey is saying in terms of perhaps the sentiment on Europe being a bit too high. But I will tell you, when I look at my own positioning work, which is actually hard dollar positioning, I see conflicting signals. So if you look at the futures market data tracked by CFTC, European exposure is quite high, but it actually pretty much resembles what we see in the US. So let's call that a wash. If you look at asset allocation portfolios or global large cap equity funds and how they're actually exposed to different regions of the world, what we see on the large cap equity funds in particular is that the US is highly, highly owned, and that there's still room for European and UK in particular exposures to climb. So I think at least from the real hard positioning data, as opposed to just the pure sentiment, what's in people's heads, what's actually in people's portfolios, I think there's still some room.
Dan, do you agree?
Yes, and I would say that maybe the only difference between me and Lori is in terms of thinking about the time horizon. So I definitely concur, and the team at Morgan Stanley concurs that short term, next 6 months or so, Europe could certainly be a catch-up trade. The key divergence there has been the vaccine rollout, which is finally ramping up more extensively in Europe. So that's going to help their reopening process catch up to the United States. All of that being said, I do think beyond that, there's still structural issues with regard to European politics, with regard to strength of earnings growth and some inherent skews towards old economy sectors that might not be as competitive in a more competitive, particularly Asian and U.S. technology competition going forward.
Lori Calvasina, Dan Skelly, thank you both of you for taking the time today. Coming up, consequences of a policy mistake. Oaktree co-founder Howard Marks joins us to discuss his outlook for yields on the riskiest debt. This is Bloomberg.
It's such an interesting new world. The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging. We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
Crypto is a nuanced issue, and it's possible the U.S. gets crypto wrong.
Announcing a project and doing a project is something different. And that's why we are so proud. We have started now the first one here. It's running, and I believe that we will see scalability. have now a base to show use cases, so we can develop new cases on how to build a hydrogen economy.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
This is Bloomberg Markets, the open Fed day. All eyes toward the Federal Reserve later today for some of the sector price action ahead of that. Let's get to Bloomberg's Dave Wilson. Dave.
Lisa, in going through the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500, pretty much an even split, 6 up, 5 down. It's more interest rate sensitive areas of the market are higher, utilities and real estate. Now, on the other hand, more economically sensitive areas, they're down. Financial stocks with the biggest declines at the moment, followed by energy, raw materials, and industrials. I'll tell you, though, technology, kind of a split, but one area where you're seeing a bit of strength, oddly enough, is in software stocks. And I say that because Oracle is the biggest decliner in the S&P 500 after its fiscal fourth quarter results came out late yesterday. And if you look at the S&P 500 software index, it's really dominated by Microsoft. Oracle's actually been one of the best performers in the group this year. Microsoft, though, really carrying the day, and certainly that's the case in today's trading as well. Adobe also higher, and the quarterly results from the design software maker are due out after the close tomorrow.
Dave, thank you so much. This is a joy, sort of a behemoth in debt markets, one of the founders of the high-yield credit market. Oaktree Capital's co-chair, Howard Marks, joining us. Howard, it is a joy to have you on this show, especially on Fed Day. And we really have to start with a state of play in the credit markets. We're seeing yields fall to record lows. We're seeing an unprecedented pace of debt issuance. Howard, are you buying right now or are you selling?
We don't operate in those terms. We invest all the time. Can you send and the idea of more or less buying or selling is not the right way to look at it. The question is whether to be more or less aggressive. And our stance right now is actually quite neutral. We think that the future is unclear with pluses and minuses on each side.
Get at that quickly, I'll try.
And that's actually something that a lot of people have been talking about, that basically we're in a credit nirvana, that yes, prices are expensive, but they will likely continue to be expensive for the foreseeable future. Right now, should the Fed be more worried about financial instability by continuing with their policies the way they are? Or frankly, have they nailed it? Have they gotten it right and supported the market in the best possible way with the ability to extricate themselves slowly over time?
Well, that's a great way to put the question. If you look at where we were, 15 months ago, it was a disaster, and with the potential to get worse. And now we're in very good shape, and all our markets and the economy are very strong. So you sure can't say they got it wrong. Should they continue to stimulate and make credit easily available? Or is there a threat of overheating and inflation? And this is the key question today, and it's unanswerable. Nobody knows the answer to these questions. I have a lot of respect for the Fed. Obviously, they're more concerned with undershooting on strengthening the economy than they are with overshooting and creating long-term inflation. And that's why I say that the merits are quite balanced. But, again, I'm in a neutral stance, and I'm going to stay there.
You're going to stay in a neutral stance, and yet there are a lot of funds, I'm thinking pensions, I'm thinking others, that are looking for extreme returns of 8%. I call that extreme in a territory where we have 1.5% yields on 10-year treasuries. How much does that amp up the threat as we go forward in this nirvana period for credit, as many people say it is, given the fact that people are shooting for something that really isn't that attainable without taking more extreme risk?
You know, Lisa, you're exactly right. The biggest challenge today is how to get good returns in a low return world. With treasuries, with cash at 0 and treasuries yielding 1 to 2 and high yield bonds yielding 4 and stocks expected to return 5, 6, 7 if we're lucky in the long run, where do you get 7 or 8? And, you know, many of my clients, U.S. clients, need 7 to make the math work. And it's very, very challenging. And you can't get 7 today safely and reliably and doing the things that you always used to do. So you have to push out on the risk curve and push into unfamiliar market sectors. But certainly there are risks in doing so.
What are some of the best risk-adjusted return possibilities when you start pushing out into risk?
Well, I think that private markets are usually less efficiently priced. That is to say, they have deviations of price from value, usually more so than the public market. So you want to go into the private markets, except then you have liquidity risk. You want to go into alternative markets like real estate, structured credit, complex instruments, instruments that are not homogeneous. But then you have manager risk because you need somebody to help you make the selections, and you got to get that right. So you know, these are the area you want to look at the things that are downtrodden, the things that did not hold their own last year and suffered from the pandemic. You want to get the ones of those that will recover, not the ones that won't. You want to look into the emerging markets and maybe China, certainly, and the foreign markets in general. But you need expertise to do that. So, you know, and by the way, we don't think that that the rest of the world economies are necessarily as strong as ours, although China is doing extremely well. So all of these are the off the beaten path locations where you might get some better risk-adjusted returns, but there are risks involved.
Right. There always are risks, and probably now is probably the time when people are more inclined to take those risks slowly because of how much cash there is out there that's being put to work and looking to be put to work. You mentioned China. I know that you have been progressively more interested in investing in China. Have you expanded your footprint there based on how they have come out of the recovery, or are you holding back as you wait for the deleveraging process to sort of complete itself and figure out where policy is over there?
Well, you know, Lisa, our investment decisions are not driven by these macro considerations of, for example, as you described, their delevering efforts. We make investments when we find bargains, and a bargain is defined as something where the intrinsic value exceeds the price. And we don't ever say, well, I think it's a bargain, but I think it's going to get cheaper because there's going to a correction coming. We buy the bargain, and if another bargain comes along, and hopefully maybe even cheaper, we buy that one too. And that's what we're doing and continue to do today in China.
So I do want to say we're having technical issues. We know that you were interested in coming on to talk about this incredible initiative that you're working on to bring a bigger diversity to private markets, and we're having technical issues. So can I bring on the other individual who is participating with it for management leadership for tomorrow? But Oaktree Capital made a pretty significant investment in an effort to try to bring in a greater number of Black individuals into senior management in private capital to diversify the alternative industry completely in a sense at a time when it really isn't that diverse. Can you tell us why this was important for you to do?
Well, look, there are lots of changes going on in society, many of them for the better. I think it came to all of our attention last year more than ever that there is inequality and there's a lack of diversity. And that extends into our industry. you know, last year with the pandemic and the videos and the protests, I think that the world became more sensitized to some of the social issues. And it was just actually Friday, it was the 1-year anniversary of a memoir I wrote called Not Enough, which said that if we are, I believe we're at Oak Tree, just like our colleagues at Aries and Apollo, are of good intention, and we say the right thing, and we want to do the right thing, and we want the world to be a better place. But my conclusion at that time was that all those things are not enough, and we should take some tangible steps. So, as announced yesterday, we and Aries and Apollo are forming something called OldFin.
Management Leadership for Tomorrow, yeah.
Right, which will have the goal of
broadening the diversity. Howard, I'm so sorry to do this. We're out of time. I love speaking with you. Thank you for your insights. And it sounds like a fantastic initiative. This was Countdown to the Open. This is Bloomberg.
We're now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution.
The battery problem may be the biggest unsolved problem in all of technology.
Every time the United States has done great transformative things, there has been a partnership between government and the private sector.
With a willing partner to ensure competitiveness and draw in investment in the United States, Canada's going to be able to be even more ambitious.
The objective for Glasgow, first and foremost, is to keep that 1.5 degree temperature rise within reach.
The train has left the station. Investors care about it. People who work inside of corporate America care about these issues. And certainly we see that with just the broader community.
There's not enough tax in the world for private sector to pay for all of this. It's going to have to be a public-private partnership.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off, these guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
Our next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has come in here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication?
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansati.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. jeevansati.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from traditional caste community conservative parameters to something like which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji you use the most to send to each other?
There's a bear which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically, bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire two families and hundreds of guests. Luckily, there are websites and apps for that.
We searched online, we got in touch with Wedding Brigade, and they helped us finalize the venue. And it makes the search faster and efficient.
Startups like the Wedding Brigade are challenging traditional wedding planners in this $50 billion industry. It provides various services from booking banquet venues to buying wedding gowns. The website makes money by charging commission from vendors.
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings based.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949 in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry Citi?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
that moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you, millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
And there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and it was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness. Don't you think?
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends.
But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start. From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections.
Yes.
the U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, come to I say, 24 people went for the job. 24 23 people accepted. I was the only one guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street, and back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你高。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你们差。我们在座的所有人的脑袋绝不比你们差。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York.
Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true?
After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma is an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma, but Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it served him well.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible success after PayPal. For Thiel, that began with an early, modest $500,000 investment in Facebook.
And in VC speak, early means big risk, but also big reward. He turned that initial $500,000 investment into more than $1 billion in cash.
But Thiel was just getting started with Facebook, and he went on to make a whole bunch of wildly successful investments.
From SpaceX to Airbnb to one of the largest, most powerful companies in the United States, if not the world, and of course that's Palantir.
The incredibly controversial secretive data mining startup he founded with his colleagues from PayPal. It connects data silos and then allows non-technical people to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission.
And several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
Here's another contradiction. He's donated to free press initiatives, including the Committee to Protect Journalists.
But he also secretly spent tens of millions of dollars bankrolling a lawsuit filed by Hulk Hogan over the publication of a sex tape and bankrupting the independently run Gawker Media. Why did he do this? Because in 2007, one of Gawker Media's blogs, ValueAg, outed him as gay. And with the lawsuit, he
found an opportunity to get back at them by funding the lawsuit that Hulk Hogan was able to bring then, but he wouldn't have been able to do that without Thiel's money.
And finally, Thiel's biggest contradiction, his endorsement of Donald Trump.
When he was asked about his support for Trump, he was surprised at the outrage that came with it from many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You have a very special back.
He was named the transitional advisor. And in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
Two 2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's energy independence executive order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
There's an inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. Origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Lightbright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch. Some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file. And we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I think I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I've learned so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is opened, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it. And we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. I think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits at different wavelengths. we bring it over to the aging table, where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. It's Suspend cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle. And it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's the stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes, you can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to the teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. A lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. We go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched. You have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, it's time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱。